picture this. It's the tense, like incredibly sweltering, humid night of August 4th, 1965.
Right, in Louisville, Kentucky.
Exactly. And you are looking through the window of a modest home at a 34-year-old woman. And she is cautious. I mean, honestly, she is bordering on paranoid at this point.
Yeah, she actually just had a car alarm installed, which, for a private citizen back then was incredibly rare technology.
Super rare. And she had also just bought a firearm for personal protection. She really does not want to leave her house tonight. She has the blinds drawn, the doors locked. But then the phone rings.
Right, and it's a friend on the line basically begging her to come out into the dark.
And reluctantly, going against literally all of her instincts, she caves. She steps out into that heavy summer air, gets into her car, drives off into the night, and is never seen alive again.
It honestly sounds exactly like the opening scene of some noir thriller, but this is a very real, very tragic historical event.
Yeah.
And the woman we're talking about, she isn't just anybody. This is Alberta O. Jones.
Alberta O. Jones was an absolute powerhouse. I mean, we are talking about a woman whose entire life was defined by just shattering barriers left and right.
Oh, absolutely. She was the first Black woman to pass the Kentucky bar. She became Louisville's first Black female prosecutor, which is huge.
Right, and she was a civil rights pioneer. She organized block by block to help register like 6,000 Black voters. And that fundamentally shifted the political landscape. It was instrumental in ousting a mayor to establish new laws against racial discrimination.
Yeah, and if all of that somehow wasn't enough, she was the brilliant attorney who actually negotiated Muhammad Ali's very first professional boxing contract.
Just a completely incredible resume. She was this trailblazer moving at lightning speed during the absolute peak of the civil rights movement. But her murder abruptly cut all of that short.
It did, and what makes this case so incredibly haunting today is the sheer volume of physical evidence left behind, contrasted against the staggering, almost incomprehensible lack of justice.
Exactly. So what does this all mean for you jumping into this deep dive with us today?
Well, we are launching a full-fledged criminal investigation into a 60-year-old unsolved mystery.
We are pulling out the declassified Louisville Police Department case files, combing through historical news archives, modern cold case summaries, all of it.
Right, and we're going to explore a story that is just riddled with baffling crime scenes, inexplicably destroyed evidence, and, well, a suspects list that ranges from local neighborhood teenagers all the way to the highest echelons of institutional power.
To really understand how this happened, I mean, we have to look at the exact mechanics of that night. Like, why did Alberta leave the safety of her home when she was clearly already on high alert?
Yeah, it was around 11:00 p.m. when her friend Gladys called.
Right, Gladys was a hairstylist, and she practically begged Alberta to come over because a new custom wig Alberta had ordered was finally ready to be fitted.
At 11 o'clock at night. I mean, that alone feels super strange to me. It totally does. And Alberta initially said no. She was like, it's late, I'm exhausted, and I'm scared. But Gladys just pushed really hard.
She laid on a guilt trip, right?
Yeah, exactly. She said something along the lines of, oh, you've gotten snobby since getting that new prosecutor job.
Okay.
And Gladys also mentioned wanting some free legal advice about some personal trouble she was in. So the guilt trip works.
It works. Alberta finally caves and arrives at Gladys's house around 11:30 p.m. But this is where we hit what feels like a massive, fateful domino falling.
The car switch.
Yes, the car switch. Alberta was known literally all over town for driving this very distinctive, impossible-to-miss pink Thunderbird. It was her signature look.
But that night, the Thunderbird was in the shop. And that expensive car alarm she had just bought, it was wired to the Thunderbird.
Exactly. So instead, she was driving this completely generic white Ford Fairlane rental car.
And that car swap is basically the foundational psychological question of the entire case. Like, was this a targeted assassination by enemies who knew her every single move, or was it a tragic crime of opportunity?
Right, because it's a recognizable symbol of a powerful prosecutor. Would the attackers have been so brazen?
Exactly. Or did they just see a lone, vulnerable woman in an anonymous white rental car and seize a horrible opportunity?
It fundamentally shifts how you look at the timeline. Because from here, the window of time gets incredibly tight. Alberta and Gladys leave the house around 12:15 a.m. to grab food at a local seafood place called Kingfish.
Right, and on the way back, they pick up a local newspaper, the Louisville Defender. They go back to Gladys's house, do the final wig fitting, and then Gladys claims she watched Alberta walk out and get into her rental car somewhere between 1:30 and 2 a.m.
And from there, the geographic trail just gets incredibly ominous. At 2 a.m., Alberta makes a quick stop at a local convenience store for a soda.
And the clerk later reports seeing her talking to 3 unidentified teenagers in the parking lot. He says, nothing looked overtly threatening. He looks down to do his work, looks back up a moment later, and the car and the teenagers are all just gone.
Which makes the event at 2:15 a.m. utterly terrifying. Just 1 block away from that convenience store, a couple is jolted awake by the sound of a woman screaming in the humid night air.
They rush to their front door and witness this violently chaotic scene. 2 men are physically dragging a woman from the middle of the street toward a white or light-colored Ford.
And a third man is waiting inside the running car. The men brutally shove her into the back seat, and then one of them reaches down and grabs something from the street. The witnesses thought it looked like a purse or maybe a brick before he jumps in.
Yeah, and then the car screeches off heading west toward the viaduct and the massive dark expanse of the Ohio River.
The next morning, that geography, the river and the surrounding infrastructure, it becomes the absolute center of the investigation, and it presents a total forensic nightmare.
It really does. Boys walking along the Ohio River find Alberta's body floating face down, about 15 feet from the shore. The coroner determines she had been severely beaten.
She had lacerations on her head and deep scrapes on her arms, which indicates a brutal struggle. But the physical beating isn't actually what killed her.
No. Tragically, the autopsy revealed water in her lungs. She was put into the river alive, and she died from drowning somewhere between 2:30 and 4:30 in the morning.
Just horrific. And when she was pulled from the water, she was missing several key items. Her shoes, her purse, her upper dentures, and that brand new custom wig.
Right, and the fact that she was put in the water on the Kentucky side makes the location of those missing items completely illogical, especially the shoes.
Let's talk about the shoes, because they weren't found in the river or on the riverbank. They were found an hour before her body was even discovered, completely dry, scattered about 10 feet apart on the exit ramp of the Sherman-Minton Bridge.
Which is this massive double-decker bridge that connects Louisville, Kentucky to southern Indiana. But they weren't just on the bridge. They were found on the lower level ramp coming back into Kentucky from Indiana.
This is where understanding the environmental mechanics of the river is just crucial. Authorities consulted hydrology experts regarding the Ohio River's currents at that specific bend.
Yeah, and the hydrology dictates that if someone threw Alberta from the top of that bridge or drove across and put her in the water on the Indiana shoreline, the currents would have pushed her body to wash up on the Indiana shore.
Exactly. Because she washed up on the Kentucky side,
Yeah.
physics dictate she had to have been put in the water from the Kentucky shoreline.
Right, which makes the Indiana bridge drop completely baffling. I mean, if they dumped her from the Kentucky bank, why did they cross the bridge into another state at all?
Why take her shoes off? And if you do take them off, why leave them scattered on an off-ramp coming back into Louisville?
It suggests a really frantic, chaotic aftermath, and the car itself tells an even more disturbing story.
Oh, the car. The white Ford Fairlane is found abandoned on a quiet residential street just 2 miles from where her body was pulled out. And the scene inside is horrific.
Blood covered more than half of the back seat. Her upper dentures were found discarded on the floorboard. There was a torn piece of that exact Louisville Defender newspaper she had bought earlier with Gladys, and it had been crumpled up and used to wipe bloody hands.
Investigators found fragments of a red brick, strands of hair, and latent fingerprints all over the interior and exterior. It's an absolute goldmine of physical evidence.
It is, but it also presents a mathematical impossibility that proves they didn't just stay in that Kentucky neighborhood.
Right, the mileage. When Alberta picked up that rental car at 6:00 p.m. the previous evening, the rental agency logged the exact mileage. When police processed the abandoned car, there were 51 new miles on the odometer.
And the car had been sitting abandoned since at least 6 a.m., which gives it a strict 12-hour window. But if you map her known route, from the rental agency to her home, to Gladys's house, to the Kingfish restaurant, and back, it totals 15, maybe 20 miles tops.
Exactly. 51 miles minus the 20 known miles leaves 31 completely unaccounted miles.
And that extra mileage perfectly aligns with a deliberate round-trip drive across the Sherman-Minton Bridge into Indiana and back. The geography of the car's movement confirms what the shoes suggested. They crossed state lines.
But why? Like, what were they doing in Indiana? This is where the narrative shifts from a brutal, chaotic abduction to a deeply unsettling mystery involving the very people supposed to be solving it.
Yeah, because we have an explosive witness sighting regarding that bridge crossing. A bakery worker named Peter Baker was driving to his early morning shift at 4:35 a.m.
And he and his coworker explicitly recall seeing a white car stopped on the Sherman-Minton Bridge and pulled up directly behind it, a fully marked Louisville Police Department cruiser.
A marked police car. At 4:35 a.m., right in the exact time window when Alberta is either going into the water or is already drowning.
And no police officer ever reported making a traffic stop on that bridge that night. Nobody called it into dispatch. Nobody admitted it was them.
Nope, none of them.
I have to pause here because this isn't just a minor clerical error. I mean, we are looking at a marked cruiser pulled up behind the exact model of car used in a brutal abduction, hovering over the river where the victim drowned, right when she drowned.
It's incredibly suspicious.
Is it possible this was just, 1960s procedural incompetence? Because to me, it smells like a massive systemic cover-up.
Well, it gets worse. When Alberta's family officially filed the missing persons report, they didn't know the exact details of her night. They didn't mention Gladys or the timeline because they didn't know about them yet.
Right.
Yet a senior Louisville police officer somehow already knew intimate, specific details about Alberta's movements with Gladys before Gladys or the family had ever been officially interviewed by detectives.
How did he know her exact movements if he wasn't tracking her?
Exactly.
Okay, if you're listening and trying to give the authorities the benefit of the doubt, the events of August 7th are going to make that completely impossible.
Oh, the fingerprints.
Yes. 3 days after the murder, the police have an evidence envelope full of pristine fingerprints meticulously lifted from the rental car.
And we should clarify how vital these are. In 1965, lifting a pristine print involved carefully dusting the surface, applying a specialized adhesive tape to lift the powder, and transferring it to a permanent card. It was a delicate process.
These cards were the golden tickets to solving the case. So an officer named Elliot arrives for his night shift at the fingerprint lab. He goes to pull the print cards to begin comparing them against known local suspects. He opens the evidence envelope, and it's completely empty.
It's almost comical in a very dark, twisted way. You literally couldn't write a more cliché, corrupt 1960s cop movie script if you tried.
Literally. Like, where's the prime murder evidence? Oh, I tossed it in the garbage bin between the desks? It defies belief.
It really does. Officer Elliot starts frantically tearing the lab apart, and he finds the cards physically thrown into a trash can.
Right in the trash.
No,
And because they were tossed in the garbage among other debris, several of the delicate prints were completely ruined.
It's the forensic equivalent of burning the only map out of a maze. The most crucial prints, the pristine ones pulled from the left window of the car, right where the abductors would have grabbed the door, were entirely destroyed or missing.
They were left with one single, heavily smeared print from that window.
Yeah.
But hold on, chain of custody in 1965 wasn't what it is today. But you don't just lose prime evidence in a trash can. Someone had to physically intercept that envelope before the lab technician processed it. Who had access?
Well, Officer Elliot investigated that immediately. He found out that just before his shift, only 2 people had been alone in the room with the prints. A lab technician and a Sergeant Miller.
Okay.
The technician stated on the record that he was about to process the cards, but Sergeant Miller explicitly ordered him to leave the prints alone, saying he was going to look at them himself. Sergeant Miller was the last person to handle the envelope.
Wow.
And the most shocking part of the case files. There is absolutely zero record of Sergeant Miller ever being formally interrogated about why he threw the prime evidence of a high-profile murder investigation into the garbage. He was never disciplined. He just kept working the case.
They effectively kneecapped their own investigation from the inside. Without those pristine window prints, they were essentially left groping in the dark. And because of that, the case goes cold.
Decades pass, the trail freezes completely.
But then fast forward to 2008. The technological landscape has completely changed. The FBI now utilizes AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System.
Right. Cold case investigators submit one of those surviving smeared fingerprint cards that Officer Elliot managed to rescue from the trash.
And AFIS works by digitally mapping the tiny ridges and bifurcations of a print, which allows it to piece together matches even from degraded 40-year-old samples. And by an absolute miracle, the system gets a hit.
It does. The algorithm matches the print to a man named Arthur Porter III. Now, in 2008, he is living a quiet life in California. But back in August 1965, he was a 17-year-old kid living in Louisville.
And in a chilling, almost cinematic twist of fate, his father owned the prominent Black-owned funeral home where Alberta's body had been taken for autopsy after she was pulled from the river.
A Louisville cold case detective immediately flies out to Los Angeles for an interrogation, and reading the transcript is just a masterclass in psychological pressure.
Oh, for sure. The detective sits down with Arthur, a man who has lived 43 years, thinking he got away with whatever happened that night. Arthur tries to play it cool. He insists he was just a quote-unquote good kid, a bookworm back then.
He cleverly dances around the questions, carefully avoiding any admission that he ever physically touched a white Ford rental car. But the detective corners him, and Arthur eventually agrees to take a polygraph test.
And he fails it spectacularly. Now, it's important to understand how a polygraph works. It doesn't magically detect lies. It measures autonomic nervous system arousal, things like spikes in heart rate, blood pressure, and galvanic skin response.
Right, and when Arthur was asked directly about the car and the night of August 4th, his nervous system went into absolute overdrive. The official report noted he showed the highest level of deception possible.
But despite the failed polygraph and the digital fingerprint match, the legal mechanism of reasonable doubt rears its head. The Commonwealth Attorney in Kentucky reviewed the 2008 findings and refused to prosecute.
Why? Because back in 1965, the investigators who lifted the prints failed to document the exact specific location on the car where that particular surviving print was found.
Exactly. Without documentation proving whether that print was lifted from the bloody interior back seat or just casually left on the exterior hood by a kid walking by, prosecutors felt they couldn't definitively place Arthur inside the vehicle during the murder. Arthur Porter III maintained his innocence until he died in 2024.
But Arthur did drop one absolute bombshell during that interrogation in California, almost by accident.
It really did.
While he's sweating, trying to explain away how his fingerprint might have innocently gotten on the outside of that car, he starts rambling about where he used to hang out that summer. He names a specific park.
A park that is literally right in the middle of the abduction zone. Like 1 block from the convenience store where Alberta talked to the 3 teenagers, and 1 block from where the couple heard the screaming at 2:15 a.m.
And he mentions that he was always hanging out there with his 2 best friends.
This is where the structural failures of the 1960s justice system just come full circle.
Yeah. When the detective asked who these 2 best friends were, Arthur casually revealed that their fathers were both high-ranking officers in the Louisville Police Department. One friend's father was a major. The other's father was a sergeant.
A sergeant? Are you kidding
Yeah.
me? So Arthur and his 2 police-connected buddies are hanging out in the exact neighborhood at the exact time of the abduction. The mathematics of that coincidence are staggering.
It raises a huge, unavoidable question. Were Arthur and his friends the 3 teenagers at the convenience store?
And if one of those boys was a sergeant's son, does that explain exactly why Sergeant Miller threw the bloody fingerprints into the trash can 3 days later? Was he protecting his colleague's kid?
It is a systemic connection that is impossible to ignore. But we also have to remember the strict facts of the declassified files. No one was ever officially charged, and the police records from that era are notoriously incomplete, missing, or redacted.
Which brings us to the broader motives. Because if this wasn't just teenagers committing a robbery gone horribly wrong, we have to look at the other powerful enemies Alberta Jones had made.
And a key piece of physical evidence strongly points to premeditation rather than a random mugging, the missing wig.
Right. The entire reason Gladys lured her out of her locked house was to fit this custom wig. Gladys claimed Alberta was wearing it when she finally left.
Now, we have to look at the mechanics of 1960s fashion. A custom wig for a Black woman in 1965 wasn't just tossed on like a baseball cap. It was an architectural feat.
It would have been heavily secured with dozens of bobby pins anchoring it to tightly braided hair underneath. It physically could not just slip off in a river current. Yet there was no sign of pins in her hair during the autopsy.
Adding to the confusion, Gladys's story regarding that wig changed multiple times over the years. First, she told police she watched Alberta get into the car wearing it. Later, she said she only watched her drive away.
Originally, she stated Alberta came back inside the house after eating at Kingfish to adjust the wig. Years later, she claimed Alberta never came back inside at all.
It leaves investigators wondering if Alberta was ever actually wearing that wig when she left, or if the wig was a complete fabrication used to bait her out of the house.
Which opens the door to some of the alternative theories documented in the case files, like the hitman theory. There was a man sitting in a Chicago jail in 1966 who bragged to cellmates that he and his crew were hired to kill a prominent attorney in Louisville.
He claimed they executed the hit and then sold her custom wig somewhere in Kentucky. But conveniently, before detectives could properly interview him and verify his claims, he was stabbed to death in the prison yard.
Then there is the financial angle involving the Nation of Islam. As we mentioned, Alberta was managing Muhammad Ali's trust fund, carefully withholding 15% of his massive earnings to protect his long-term assets.
The case files document that leadership within the Nation of Islam desperately wanted access to that money, but Alberta firmly refused to release it.
In the 1980s, a determined cold case detective who started pulling on this specific thread abruptly dropped the investigation because his wife received anonymous phone calls threatening that she would be put in the river if he didn't stop digging.
That is terrifying. And we also cannot ignore the civil rights angle. Remember those 31 unaccounted miles on the rental car? Remember the shoes found near the Indiana side of the bridge? Southern Indiana was a major stronghold for the Ku Klux Klan in the 1960s. Prior to her death, Alberta had reported being stalked by white men flashing fake police badges. She had found out her phone lines were being actively tapped.
It is vital to state that we are looking at these groups, the local police, the Nation of Islam, political segregationists, strictly through the lens of the existing case files. We are simply presenting the intense reality of her daily life.
She existed at the incredibly dangerous intersection of immense political power, massive financial stakes, and intense cultural friction.
It makes me think of Alberta as a chess grandmaster, playing multiple high-stakes games simultaneously against incredibly powerful opponents while blindfolded.
Right.
With so many different factions wanting her off the board, do you think one specific group orchestrated a highly coordinated hit? Or was it a tragic random crime of opportunity by reckless teenagers that powerful people simply took advantage of after the fact, using their influence to cover up their own kids' involvement?
That is the ultimate tragedy of destroyed evidence. When you physically throw away the pristine fingerprints, when you fail to investigate a marked police cruiser sitting on the bridge during the murder, you create a vacuum of truth.
Yeah.
And in that vacuum, every theory becomes structurally possible. We don't know if she was lured to her death by a vast conspiracy or if an accidental encounter with violent teenagers was covered up by a corrupt local system. Both scenarios require a level of institutional failure that is staggering to comprehend.
It really is staggering, and despite all of this darkness and frustration, we have to bring this story back to Alberta O. Jones as a person. She made a massive historical impact in just 34 years of life.
She really did.
She didn't let fear stop her from fighting to change a deeply broken system, and her community has not forgotten her. Today, there is a prominent hometown hero banner with her face on it hanging in downtown Louisville.
There is a beautiful park named after her, and there is a dedicated researcher, Professor Lee Remington, who is writing a comprehensive book that aims to trace the financial trails and structural failures that might finally point definitively to her killers.
Her legacy is undeniably cemented in history, but legally, her case remains open. The Louisville Metro Police Department's cold case squad is still actively accepting tips. The truth of what happened that humid August night is out there, hidden somewhere in the complex geography of that river, that bridge, and those 31 missing miles.
If you are listening and you have any information, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem after 6 decades, the tip line for the Cold Case Squad is 502-574-7055.
I'll say that one more time for anyone taking notes. It's 502-574-7055.
60 years is a very long time, but as technology continues to evolve, it is never too late for the truth to surface.
So as we close the file for today's deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. We've spent a lot of time talking about how the analog nature of 1965 allowed evidence to literally be thrown into a garbage can. But we live in a digital age now. We do. In 2008, it was a digitized fingerprint algorithm that finally caught Arthur Porter III. As more and more dusty, forgotten basements full of civil rights-era case files get scanned, digitized, and run through modern algorithms, burying secrets in filing cabinets is becoming mathematically impossible.
Exactly.
It leaves you wondering, how many other perfect cold case cover-ups from the 1960s are sitting out there right now, just one digitized file away from finally seeing the light of day?